A very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for finding time to be with us today. The show is Diaspora Dispatches, and we have a bit changed the format of the show. I know usually I would bring you the latest news from the continent of Africa, but we do that now on our morning show during Good Morning Africa. And so this afternoon, just a few minutes past, maybe a minute past 3 p.m. here in Nairobi, we are going to look at the renewed conflict in Ethiopia. My name is Miriam Ogutu, and it is a pleasure to have you on board. So just a bit of a history for us to know and bring us up to date with what is happening in Ethiopia. Morning, there's something that we looked at, some news item that was quite disturbing from Ethiopia. So let me just see if I could, the number of refugees. So that is also something that we shall look at. But first off, let me just bring us up to date with the latest and a bit of a history on the ongoing conflict there in Ethiopia. So the conflict started on 4th November 2021 when Ethiopia Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed ordered a military offensive against regional forces in Tigray. He said he did so in response to an attack on a military base housing government troops. The escalation came after months of feuding between Mr. Abiy's government and leaders of Tigray's dominant political party. For almost 3 decades, the party was at the center of power before it was sidelined by Mr. Abiy, who took office in 2018. TPLF was at the center of power for about 27 years or so. But after Mr. Abiy, the current Prime Minister of Ethiopia, took power, they felt they were sidelined from the power center, and that led to 2018. He took over after the anti-government protest that we saw. The other Prime Minister stepped down and Mr. Abiy came to power. Mr. Abiy pursued reforms, but when Tigray resisted, the political crisis erupted into war. The root of this crisis can be traced in Ethiopia's system of government. Since 1994, Ethiopia has had a federal system in which different ethnic groups control the affairs of the 10 regions. Remember the powerful party from the Tigray? Yes. The Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, that is the TPLF, was influential in setting up this system that has been in place since 1994, which I've told you that was at the center of power since the setting of that system. It was the leader of a 4-party coalition that governed Ethiopia from 1991 when a military regime was ousted from power. Under the coalition, Ethiopia became more prosperous and stable, but concerns were routinely raised about human rights and the level of democracy. Eventually, discontent morphed into protest and leading to a government reshuffle that saw Mr. Abiy appointed Prime Minister. Mr. Abiy liberalized politics, set up a new party, calling it the Prosperity Party, and removed key Tigrayan government leaders accused of corruption and repression. Meanwhile, Mr. Abiy ended a long-standing territorial dispute with neighboring Eritrea, earning him a Nobel Prize in 2019. Remember, he took office in 2018. These moves, won by Mr. Abiy, popular claim that caused unease among critics in Tigray. Okay, and Tigray's leader said Mr. Abiy's reforms as an attempt to centralize power and destroy Ethiopia's federal system. That, remember, they were integral in setting up this system. The feud came to a head in September. That is last year, when Tigray defied the central government to hold its own regional election. The central government, which had postponed national elections because of coronavirus, said it was illegal. The rift grew when the central government suspended funding for Tigray and cut ties with it in October. Okay, so I hope you're getting, how this unraveled for Ethiopia to be where it is today. At the time, Tigray's administration said this amounted to a declaration of war. So when Ethiopia cut ties with Tigray, remember, they went ahead to have an election that had been postponed. A national election had been postponed because of the concerns brought about by coronavirus. But Tigray went ahead to have its own elections anyway, against the wish of the federal government. And so that was in September 2021. So the government of Abiy decided, well, if you want to do things the way you want to do things without really working in tandem with the national government, then you might as well just have it your way and eat your tomatoes. So he cut ties with them in October. At the time, Tigray's administration said this amounted to a declaration of war. So after the government led by Abiy Ahmed cut the ties, they said, oh, well, now. So this is a war, and we are fighters. Naturally, so we are ready to take on the government. So tensions increased, and the eventual catalyst came when Tigrayan forces were accused of attacking army bases to steal weapons. Mr. Abiy said Tigray had crossed a red line. The federal government, he said, is therefore forced into a military confrontation, he said. And Ethiopia, Africa's oldest independent country, has undergone a sweeping changes since Mr. Abiy came to power. He is a member of the Oromo ethnic group, Ethiopia's largest ethnic group. Mr. Abiy made appeals to political reform, unity and reconciliation in his first speech as Prime Minister. His agenda was spurred by the demands of protesters who felt Ethiopia's political elite had obstructed a transition to democracy. And of course, for more than about 2 decades, the political scene had been dominated by a coalition of 4 ethnically based parties, with Tigrayans who made up around 7% of the population holding a sway. In the 1970s and 1980s, their party, the TPLF, fought a war to seize control of the government from a military junta. The party succeeded, which is how it came to be the leading member of the coalition government that took power in 1999. And because they're the ones who led this war, and they succeeded, Tigrayans, they're seen to be coming, or TPLF, they're seen to be coming from a place of entitlement. So they feel we are the ones who fought this war in the 1970s and 1980s, and we helped seize control of the government, from a military junta that was fighting the Ethiopian government at that time. So they feel, therefore, they are entitled to the leadership of that country. So whatever decisions are being made, then they should be really part of that. And that's why when Mr. Abiy came and really, changed how things were done, and in his sweeping reforms, Tigrayans are not very happy with that, because that meant they're not really in the center, the core of the power in that country. At least that is how they felt. Now, the coalition gave autonomy to Ethiopia's regions, but retained a tight grip on the central government, with critics accusing it of repressing political opposition. So when it was in power all this time, remember, they were about leading 4 parties that came together, but TPLF was very dominant since the setup of the federal system in 1994. So TPLF was very dominant, and it was very aggressive, and there were, it did not tolerate any kind of dissenting voices. And so people didn't really enjoy being under TPLF like that. And so there was a lot of repressive political opposition during that time. So Mr. Abiy dissolved the coalition in 2019, but the TPLF refused to join his new Prosperity Party. Okay, so he said, you know what? Prosperity Party is the good name for a new coalition in Ethiopia, because I think this will make all of us prosper in peace and unity. But that was not the case. TPLF was not interested. So this nab was followed by a further escalations. And Tigray's decision to hold its own election last September, I said last year, for example, was an unprecedented act of defiance against the central government. So they were spoiling for a war, in short. Both sides then designated each other as illegitimate. All right, the audacity, right? Now, Tigray argued at the time that the central government had not been tested in a national election since Mr. Abiy's appointment as a prime minister. And polls have since been held in some parts of the country. And the TPLF also called out the Prime Minister for his unprincipled friendship with Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki. And I think this was one of the key issues that actually the TPLF had a bit of an ease with. The friendliness, the friendly nature, with Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki. There's a lot of history between the Tigrayans and Eritrea, the other side. They do share a border, and the relationships have been very frosty. And so Isaias Afwerki, even during this conflict that has continued from last year, there has been credible information that is actually supporting the Ethiopian government in fighting, the TPLFs. And the border between Ethiopia and Eritrea had been closed for many years. So the reason why Abiy Ahmed was even given a Nobel Peace Prize, why he won a Nobel Peace Prize, is because he was able to hold talks, which other leaders who had come before him had not been able to do, with the Eritrean leader, and he was able to mediate and, have a truce that saw the borders of these two countries opened, at least for a while. But later on, Isaias Afwerki went to close the border on his side, but Ethiopian border continues to be open till today. So that is one of the key things that led to Abiy Ahmed to get the Nobel Peace Prize. And because of this, TPLF did not like that, because they consider Isaias Afwerki to be their enemy. So they don't, the fact that Abiy Ahmed was able to make peace with Eritrea, they did not like that. So that helped things to escalate. And there has been long animosity between the Tigray and Eritrea's government, as I have explained there. A dispute over territory along their border was the cause of a war fought between Ethiopia and Eritrea from 1998 until 2000. So bad blood. You may remember this dispute making headlines in 2018, I'm quite sure. And that year, Mr. Abiy signed a peace treaty, as I said, with Eritrea, ending the territorial spat. But TPLF did not feel as if this was done in a way that they felt really addressed the issues or solved the matter. And anyway, Eritrea went ahead to close the border on its side. So maybe Abiy Ahmed needs to return the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know, maybe. So a year later, Mr. Abiy won the Nobel Peace Prize. But now, it is the war and starvation that is drawing attention to Ethiopia, not the person. When he came to power, he was known as a reformist, a person who was a champion for peace and things like that. But now, attention is being drawn to Ethiopia, but for all the wrong reason, and opposite of how Abiy Ahmed was introduced to the world. Okay, so I was just giving a bit of a background of what is happening and the latest in this war in Ethiopia. Thank you so much, Kangot and Riel and the rest of you who are watching me. Thank you so much. And in case you know a bit of whatever is happening in Ethiopia, you're free to share your comments there, and we can talk about, we can talk about it. And okay, so now the latest is that the war in Ethiopia between the federal government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front has resumed at full scale. The route back to negotiations is uncertain at best. Remember, there was like a 5-month truce, that had a ceasefire that was agreed, and it only lasted for about 5 months. But as we speak right now, it appears the war has resumed, and in a larger scale. The two sides, that is the government side and also the TPLF side, agree that the first shots were fired in the early morning of 24th August on the southern border of Tigray. 24th August, that is last month, where it adjoins the neighboring Amara state at the town of Kobo. Each side blames the other for firing those shots. What is clear from the information obtained from Western diplomats is that the Ethiopian National Defense Force and its allied Amara militia, known as the Fano, had mobilized a huge force to that coalition over prior weeks. And meanwhile, mass conscription of the TPLF had swelled its ranks, and it had devoted much of its resources to training and rearming, although it has denied forced recruitment. So perhaps maybe what could interest people right now is who is supplying and equipping the TPLF. I think that is the mystery that we've not been able to solve right now. But obviously there's somebody, I'm assuming, because where are they getting the supplies? There's somebody that is supplying and equipping the TPLF. Fine, they had been in power for a long time, so there's a possibility they also had their own, because they appear to even have their own armies, And this, when you look at the countries that have a federal system of governance here in the continent, it is not working very well. So I don't know if federalism is The way to go here in the continent, look at Ethiopia, a very good example. Look at Nigeria. Look at Somalia. Which other country has a federal system? A couple of others, there are not so many in the continent. When you compare with countries that are also governed through the federal system, like say Germany, like the US has the states, here we have the counties. But I think it's different because when you look at the federal system, it's like autonomous regions with their own governing ways, especially when you look at how Ethiopia's federal system is really designed. TPLF is a whole country within Ethiopia, at least they perceive themselves like that, with a fully armed army and things like that. So when you have that, and then you have the national government, I don't know how you expect that to work in a continent where institutions are weak, in a continent where we are still struggling with good governance and good leadership. So I think this is a setup for failure, because federalism, when you look at how for the countries that it is working for outside of this continent, it's really a good thing. For instance, as I mentioned there, Germany, it's really a good thing. The federal states are able to do whatever it is they're supposed to do. So when you go to Germany, they really don't care who is the chancellor, because whoever is the chancellor, it does not matter. It does not affect their lives. Because the federal states are able to carry out their duties and they're able to do whatever they're supposed to do for the people there, and they're accountable for the people. So the chancellor is just a symbol of national unity that bring all these states, federal states together, and then it works like that. So it's working. But when you look at how federal systems are set in this continent, it's interesting. Ethiopia, look at the governors who had these different states. They are like demigods. Look at our governors here. We have counties, not federal states. We have counties here. But we do have counties that are headed by governors. And when you see how they act and how the power goes into their head and how they just feel like they're demigods. So they fail to understand the true meaning of devolution. For us, it's devolution, not federalism, but I think it mirrors, federalism. But it's maybe it is something that should be relooked, especially in these countries across the continent. So anyway, throughout July and August this year, Addis Ababa largely kept the blockade of essential services in place, permitting only a trickle of food, medicine, and fertilizers for this season's crops. So the government of Ethiopia was really controlling what was going in and out of the, Tigray region. And the TPLF is, of course, very unimpressed by the international praise for a 5-month humanitarian truce, which allowed the World Food Programme to resume operations in Tigray, but in a very limited scale. So as much as you're sitting and saying, oh, there was peace for 5 months and things seems to have cooled down, Tigray is not buying that. They're not happy with that because they insist that Addis Ababa continued blockade amounts for using hunger as a weapon of war, and that the aid operations were pitiful and insufficient. The World Food Programme says it was reaching tens of thousands of people. That was a start, but for short of 4.8 million is still in need. And in an open letter to international leaders on the eve of the fighting, TPLF leader Debretsion Gabre Michael said, and I'll quote him, "We are fast approaching the point at which we face death. Whichever way we turn, our choice is only whether we perish by starvation or whether we die fighting for our rights and our dignity." Mass starvation is disseminating the Tigrayans, and no one knows how many have perished. But an investigation by a Belgian-led academic team earlier this year estimated that as many as 500,000 Tigrayans had died of hunger and related causes since the war began in November 2020. November 2020, not 2021. Can you imagine 500,000 Tigrayans, according to this group's estimation, have died? That is no small a stake there. And I think the people who have been even calling it genocide that has been going on there in Ethiopia, because it has all the hallmarks of what will be considered a genocide, following a massive fallout between the TPLF-controlled regional government and Mr. Abiy Ahmed's federal administration. and with the sole exception of a French TV crew from the channel at, there's been no foreign news correspondent. Remember, he banned all foreign media from covering in Tigray since the TPLF regained control of most of the region in June 2021. So you're really not able to know, even in some of these estimations that were given, you're really not able to know exactly what's happening, because unless the media is allowed really to go there, you can't know what's happening inside. And the few aid workers permitted to enter have not been able to collect basic data on child death, with the World Food Program spokesperson conceding that we just don't know whether there was a famine or not. In the short term, the humanitarian disaster can only deepen, and those limited aid operations are not even at hold. The first miaga crops that has been harvested that were planted won't be harvested for more than a month, and fighting will cause further devastation. So there has been a renewed fighting in Ethiopia between the Ethiopian government forces and the Tigrayan forces, and the Ethiopian Air Force bombed Mekelle last week, that is the capital of Tigray, hitting a kindergarten and killing 7, including 3 children. According to a medical staff, the government denied the account and instead insisted it targeted military sites only. A second airstrike was reported on Mekelle on Tuesday night. The Tigrayans questioned 12 tankers of fuel from the UN, drawing irate condemnation from senior humanitarian officials. They took charge, not to question, they took charge of the 12 tankers of fuel from the UN. And the TPLF said they had loaned the UN fuel some months ago and were only reclaiming it. But the manner and timing at their acts suggest it was not for delivering routine services, as their spokesperson had a claim. Of course, Ethiopia Air Force claimed it had shot down a plane bringing arms to Tigray from Sudan airspace. The TPLF has denied it, and I think that plane that they shot allegedly was from Uganda. And on the morning of 1st September, the TPLF claimed the Eritrean artillery began a barrage of shells, while Ethiopian ground forces poised for a group attack across the border. So a lot of accusations and counter-accusations, and the Eritrean government has characteristically remained silent. Yes, that's what Mr. Isaias Afwerki does. But he's also been accused to be really at the core of this continued fighting in Ethiopia. And fighting has also been reported in Western Tigray towards the border with Sudan. So that is the latest. And some news, part of the news that I read to you early in the morning, the United Nations has said it does not know the whereabouts of hundreds of Ethiopian former peacekeepers. They had sought asylum in neighboring Sudan after refusing to return home at the end of their mission. You know, they were in Sudan for a peace mission. So after their mandate ended, they refused to return back to Ethiopia, especially those from the Tigrayan ethnic group. They said they feared. Okay, and tens of thousands of ethnic Tigrayans had crossed the border to seek refuge in neighboring Sudan since the war broke in 2020. Now, the UN's refugee agency, UNHCR, says that earlier this year they received credible reports that there were efforts to recruit soldiers, sometimes forcefully, among those refugees. So they ran away. They're afraid of their lives. They go to a country to seek refuge. They're refugees. And from these credible reports by the United Nations, they're being forced to go back and join forces. So the UNHCR says it relayed its strong concerns to the Sudanese government. So the Sudanese government is supposed to be protecting these people. And there were no improvements. Among those seeking refuge were 650 Ethiopian former peacekeepers, mostly of Tigrayan ethnicity. They refused to return home for fear of persecution. Like I said there earlier, nearly 250 of them were granted refugee status, but the UNHCR said it does not have any information on the rest. Remember, there were about 650,000 and 650 former Ethiopian peacekeepers, and now the UNHCR does not know their whereabouts. So I hope they were not forced to go back to fight. I hope that was not the case, or I don't know. But this renewed fighting in Ethiopia is truly worrying, and I'm just hoping that something will be done, African Union, because Tigrayan had insisted on wanting Kenya to mediate on that process. But of course, Abiy Ahmed, there had been a bit of bad blood for whatever reason, Abiy Ahmed had some, his government was not very warm and welcoming towards the Kenyan government. But President Uhuru Kenyatta, I think, being the diplomat that he was, really extended himself, if I can use that word, so many times in trying to bring peace and trying to bring those parties together. And he made several attempts, but that might not have been successful, or that maybe was successful and of course others who made also efforts in having these 5 months of ceasefire. But now the fighting has resumed. So hopefully, is it the African Union had sent Jonathan Goodluck, the former Nigerian president, to be the mediator of that process. We've not heard any reports about how far is the process, what is happening, what are the problems, how can the world come in and help. We've not had any credible reports about the development of this crisis. So perhaps they need to get somebody else, and they need to find other mediators, because this madness has come to a stop, surely. If it's true that over 500,000 people have died from Tigray since this war started in 2020, and we're just sitting and watching, this is sad. This is sad. This is sad, and I think it is about time that this matter was addressed. And if it was another country in this continent, that what is happening in Ethiopia was happening in another country in this continent, we would have had a lot of sanctions coming from the Western powers. But we know the manner in which the Western world, the US, Europe, have been handling this matter and the issue in Ethiopia with what I would call the kid's glove. Because one, they consider Ethiopia a very key ally in the Horn of Africa. Remember, it is in the middle of countries, of course, in Kenya, that are going through a lot of turmoil. It borders Somalia, it borders Djibouti, it borders Eritrea on this other side, and other countries. So they feel Ethiopia is a very important ally in that region. So they do not want to upset the leadership of Ethiopia as it needs it for other things, as far as other countries surrounding that region and their interest is concerned. And that is the sad part. So whatever Abiy is doing, they feel like, okay, maybe he will stop. And the sanctions that have been put forth on the AGOA by the US, maybe it's not even biting enough, because that has not gone as far as making these groups to want to sit down and have a conversation. So I think maybe we need more pressure, like we've seen more pressure being exerted on South Sudanese leaders, for those who are perceived not to want to work within the parameters of the peace agreement, or those who are upsetting the peace process. Or in other countries, like Zimbabwe, for instance, those many sanctions they have in that country, they would have some in Ethiopia. They have ways in which they put pressure on countries, but it's interesting how they pick and choose how they deal with individual cases, where they feel their interest, they have more interest, or how their interests are being represented in certain countries, especially here in the continent, and how they choose to deal with these different cases. I think that is the sad part. Otherwise, that is why Abiy Ahmed feels like he can do whatever he wants to do. And of course, Tigrayan forces cannot be absolved from blame. They've also contributed immensely over the killings and whatever it is that is happening there in Ethiopia. So both sides are to blame, but I think the bigger responsibility lies with the government led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who I've said before and I keep repeating, perhaps needs even to return his his Nobel Peace Prize. How can you be a winner of a Nobel Peace Prize for bringing peace with Eritrea, only for you guys to now form a coalition of evil? Because the Tigrayan forces are accusing Ethiopia's government of colluding with Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea to, fight them. Okay? And you won a Nobel Peace Prize for bringing peace between your border and Eritrea, and yet there's no peace in your country. How ironical is that? Do they recall this, these prizes, these awards? Maybe they should recall this one until he's able to get his out in order, and then they can give him back. All right, so that is the latest as far as the Ethiopian conflict is concerned. Thank you so much for your time and for watching. My name is Miriam Ogutu. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.